1,200 years of cold, longer than any human alive would ever see, and some populations simply never came back. 13,000 years ago, parts of what is now Syria and southern Turkey looked nothing like the dry land they are today. The uplands were rich, wild grains, pistachio groves, herds of gazelle. Groups had started staying put, not farming yet, but no longer moving every few weeks either. These were not caves. They were built structures, stone foundations, hide roofs, hearths used season after season. The first real experiment with staying somewhere. Across the northern Levant and into Anatolia, dozens of these sites were occupied simultaneously. The population was thin but spreading. Things were working. Then, around 12,900 years ago, the temperature dropped, not gradually. Within decades, fast by any geological measure, the climate lurched back toward near glacial cold. This cold lasted roughly 1,200 years. No single person alive when it started would live to see it end. Their children wouldn't either, neither would their grandchildren. 1,200 years is longer than the entire span from the fall of Rome to today. It is not a bad winter. It is a permanent new reality for every generation that lived through it. The plant foods that had made settlement possible began to fail. Wild grains need warmth to set seed. Pistachio groves need reliable summers. Neither was coming reliably anymore. The animals followed the warmth south. Gazelle herds that had grazed the uplands for centuries contracted their ranges. The hunters watched them go and had no good answer. The bones survived, and bones are honest. Skeletal assemblages from this period carry what researchers call stress markers, physical signs of nutritional collapse written into the tissue itself. Horizontal grooves in tooth enamel, called hypoplasia, form when the body is so short on calories that it stops investing in normal growth. Each groove is a recorded famine, locked in the tooth forever. The markers cluster in individuals who were children during the coldest decades, which tells you something precise. The youngest were the first to show the cost. Meanwhile, the map of occupied sites was changing fast. Upland zones that had supported settlements for centuries went quiet. The dots on the map thinned dramatically. Excavations in the upland zones find hearths that went cold and were never relit, tools left behind, storage pits emptied and not refilled. People did not come back. The groups that survived did not do so by toughing it out in the open uplands. They contracted, pulled back into sheltered valleys and lowland pockets where the cold was slightly less absolute, and they shrank. Groups that may have numbered 30 or 40 people contracted to the minimum a band could sustain, perhaps 8 to 15 individuals sharing a single hearth. Archaeologists can measure this directly. The spacing between occupied shelters collapsed. Sites that were once spread across tens of kilometers pulled together into tight clusters of 2 or 3 structures. There is a minimum below which a band cannot function. You need enough people to hunt, to gather, to care for the sick, to keep the fire going through the night. Drop below that number, and the whole thing fails. Stored provisions ran out faster than they could be replaced. A bad season before the cold hit meant some groups entered the worst years already short. There was no margin. Some groups were simply too isolated. No neighboring band close enough to trade food with, to borrow a hunter from, to absorb into when numbers fell too low. Isolation in a cold that long was a death sentence. Around 11,700 years ago, the cold broke, not dramatically, gradually, over decades. The groups still alive emerged from their refugia into a landscape that had been emptied around them. The uplands were not waiting for them. Entire zones that had supported human populations for thousands of years were simply empty. The people who had lived there were gone. What the younger Dryas left behind was not just empty land. It was a genetic and cultural bottleneck. The populations that came after descended from a very small number of surviving groups. The groups that endured in Anatolia's refugia were the same populations that, within a few centuries of the cold ending, began building at sites like Göbekli Tepe, the first monumental structures in human history. Survival here was not about strength or intelligence in any individual sense. It was about which groups happened to be in the right place, the right size, and connected to enough other people when the cold hit. The ones who vanished left almost nothing. A few foundations under the grass, some bones with grooves in the teeth. The cold was longer than memory, and memory was all they had to pass down. The 12 centuries ended. The cold released its grip, and the people who came after, who built, who planted, who eventually wrote things down, were the children of the ones who held on. If this changed how you think about human survival, subscribe. There is a lot more story left to tell.